The bell above the diner door gave a tired jingle that sounded older than the road itself, the kind of sound you hear when places survive on habit and black coffee rather than hope. And she didn't look like trouble when she slid onto the cracked vinyl stool near the end of the counter. Just another traveler with road dust on her boots and a denim jacket hanging loose around her shoulders. Hair tied back, eyes steady. The sort of woman people overlook because they mistake calm for weakness. And that mistake was exactly what brought the laughter. Because three men, 2 stools down, had been drinking since sunrise. Grease-stained plates stacked like evidence of bad decisions. Voices loud, jokes mean. The kind of guys who treated kindness like an invitation to dominate. And when one of them brushed her shoulder and she calmly asked him to move, the room tilted. Because men like that don't like being corrected, especially not by a woman who didn't raise her voice, and one of them muttered something crude, while another grinned and reached out, fingers hooking the edge of her shirt in a gesture meant to humiliate more than anything else. A sharp tug that tore fabric and drew a quick intake of breath from the waitress who froze mid-pour. The room holding its breath as if everyone sensed the line had been crossed, but no one wanted to be the first to say it. And the men laughed again, louder this time, emboldened by the silence, not knowing that the woman at the counter was named. Mara, not knowing that she'd grown up in clubhouses and back roads, not knowing that her brother's patch carried weight that didn't show itself until it was too late. And as Mara calmly stood, adjusting her jacket to cover the tear without drama, without tears, the men mistook her composure for surrender, which was twist number 1, because surrender had never been part of her vocabulary. Not after watching her older brother bleed for loyalty, not after learning that fear was a currency and silence a weapon. And she paid her bill with shaking fingers, not from fear, but from restraint, because she knew better than to explode in a place where collateral damage would land on innocent people. And when she walked out into the heat, the bell jingled again like a countdown, because the men followed, still laughing, still ignorant, and the parking lot stretched wide and empty under the noon sun. Asphalt shimmering, a perfect stage for a lesson that would ripple far beyond that diner. And one of the men grabbed her arm, not roughly enough to seem like an attack to the untrained eye, but firm enough to assert control. And that's when Mara finally spoke, voice low, steady, almost bored, telling him to let go. And when he didn't, she twisted just enough to break the grip and stepped back, eyes locking onto his with a familiarity that unsettled him, because she wasn't afraid, she was assessing. And somewhere in his gut a warning flared that he ignored, because arrogance is louder than instinct. And he shoved her, not hard, but enough to make his friends cheer. And that's when the first twist revealed itself, not in violence, but in patience, because Mara smiled, a small, sad smile, and said a single sentence that meant nothing to them and everything to the universe she came from. You just made this bigger than you. And they laughed again, because they didn't know that 20 miles away, in a strip of pine and concrete known as a clubhouse, men who lived by codes older than the law were already moving. Not because Mara called, she hadn't, but because she'd learned long ago to leave breadcrumbs in case the world turned ugly. And one of those breadcrumbs was a location ping sent automatically when her heart rate spiked beyond a certain threshold, a trick she'd learned after her brother Jack nearly died outside a bar in Arizona. And as the men in the parking lot closed in, Jack was already on his bike, patch heavy on his back, Hell's Angel's wings catching the light, a man built from scars and consequences, and the road between them was shrinking fast. But back in the lot, the men didn't see any of that. They saw a woman alone, and when one of them reached again, this time angrier, Mara moved, fast and precise, knee to shin, elbow to ribs, not to dominate but to escape. And the suddenness of it knocked the wind out of him, turning laughter into confusion. And that confusion might have saved them if they'd let it, but pride is a bad teacher, and one of them swung, catching her shoulder, spinning her into a parked car with a dull thud. And the sound carried, because moments later the first bike rolled in, then another, then a third, engines like thunder arriving without warning. And the men turned just in time to see leather and steel filling the lot, patches unmistakable, the air changing the way it does before a storm. And the diner door opened again as the waitress and a couple stepped out, drawn by the noise. And in that moment the truth landed like a dropped plate, because Mara straightened, brushing dust from her jacket, blood trickling from a split lip she didn't bother to wipe. And when the lead bike cut its engine, the silence was louder than the roar had been, and Jack took off his helmet slowly, eyes scanning, locking onto his sister, relief flickering, and then hardening into something colder when he saw the tear in her shirt. And one of the men tried to laugh it off, hands raised, words tumbling out about misunderstandings and jokes taken the wrong way. But Jack didn't look at him. Not yet. He looked at Mara, asking with his eyes if she was okay, and she nodded once, because she was. But that didn't erase what had happened, and Jack finally turned, voice calm in a way that made grown men nervous, asking who touched her, and no one answered. Because suddenly courage had evaporated, and one of the bikers stepped forward, recognizing one of the men from somewhere else. Another twist, because it turned out this wasn't their first line crossed, just the first time it had consequences. And what followed wasn't a beating. Not the way movies make it look, but something worse for men like that. Accountability, names taken, photos snapped, phones checked, stories cross-referenced, because the angels weren't interested in blood today. They were interested in making sure the lesson stuck, and they did, spreading the word up and down the highway in a language only certain people hear. And by the time the police arrived, called by a passerby who'd sensed trouble but not understood it, the men were sitting on the curb, pale and quiet, facing charges that suddenly seemed heavier than they'd ever imagined, and the angels were gone, disappearing as quickly as they'd arrived, leaving behind a parking lot that felt smaller somehow, like it had witnessed something it would never fully explain. And Mara rode away on the back of Jack's bike, arms around his waist, the road unspooling beneath them, the diner shrinking in the mirror, and as miles passed, she rested her forehead against his back, not because she was shaken, but because she was tired of being underestimated. And Jack promised her, not for the first time, that the world would learn eventually, that silence wasn't consent and calm wasn't weakness. And the twist no one expected came weeks later, when the diner owner called Mara, apologizing, telling her the waitress had testified that the men had pled out, that one of them had checked into rehab, another had lost his job, consequences rippling outward in ways no one could predict. And Mara listened quietly, hanging up and stepping outside into the sun, realizing that power didn't always look like fists or patches. Sometimes it looked like standing your ground long enough for the truth to arrive. And somewhere on the highway, engines roared, the story already becoming legend, distorted and retold, but always ending the same way. They thought she was alone, and that was their last mistake.